the show ain't free.
Alright, hello everyone and good afternoon. Welcome to the second ever Isotopic Studios seminar. The topic today is G.A.M.E, what is it? We'll be discussing not only that, but a little bit of how it works and why and how you can use it during market hours to help you decide how you're going to trade that day. So without further ado, let's just get into it. This that you're looking at is G.A.M.E. It's possible that you've opened it before in my Discord stream. Maybe you haven't, but if you have, you might be a little bit familiar with it. You know that it's got a scale out of 200. On expiration days, you have two distinct fields, and on non-expiration days, this field will be blank, or on some occasions I cover it with a little screen. So members who have used G.A.M.E most successfully typically use it as a supplementary indicator to some other system they have in place. Most notably, what you really want to pay the most attention to is the out of 200 score and the various dealer contracts. The dealer contracts are borrowed from the isotopic order book, which is currently a gold level indicator. I have plans to maybe release a portion of it as a bronze indicator that anyone can access. But for now, what we get is these borrowed contracts that make up the G.A.M.E contracts. They represent, through my system, I basically standardize the open interest and volume against the data set. I use the various Greeks along with some other calculations to determine which contracts have the most isolated, concentrated amount of that particular measurement, and then it delivers the isotopic order book. Now, in terms of what the dealer is selling or buying, I do more complicated calculations to determine that for the order book itself. So with G.A.M.E, you don't get that. You just get the very basic, what we assume to be their long and what we assume to be their short, both 0-day and non, when applicable. If you're not familiar with shorting, it's when you sell something that you don't own, typically. In a lot of cases, you have to have some sort of collateral for that, particularly if you're a retail trader. Now, dealers have the express benefit of being able to sell whatever they want anytime, without restriction, without collateral. It's just generally assumed that they can be trusted to balance their portfolio and that this will help provide market liquidity during times of crisis. So dealers get these special rules. Now, the downside is they also have to sell the things that people want to buy, whether they want to or not. Now, effectively, that becomes a short sale for the dealer the majority of the time. So the isotopic order book helps you determine all the different layers of balance that arise from this dealer behavior, from both having to sell and wanting to sell, respectively. Now, with G.A.M.E, it is actually derived from the gamma fields in the order book. And what that means is that the accelerative contracts, the ones that if momentum either sustains itself or reverses, these are the ones that are going to either gain or lose the most. So you have your dealer long and short. Sometimes they make up a spread, and that's definitely worth noting when it happens. So in this case, this is data from the end of the day on Friday. You can see that the 321 4400C and the 4395C are the long and the short. So what this tells us is that they're essentially doing a short vertical at those strikes. Now this is futures. So futures, you see it's ES here instead of SPY like we see on the 0-day. These are more reactive. These tend to change a little more fluidly throughout the day because futures are a more leveraged instrument. So when that happens, you want to definitely take that into consideration, that this is more likely to change than something like the SPY contract if it were to show up in that field. When you're reading these in the middle of the day, what you're really looking for most of the time is, does that contract stay the same for a long period of time? And if it does, particularly on the short side, that helps you get an idea of where we're going to end the day, where we're going to get pinned, either towards or at or slightly after the end of the day. Because these dealers, they want to get theirs. They either want to get it so cheap that they can cover it and it's basically no big deal, or they want it to expire worthless, particularly on the short side. Now, I would say it's safe to generally assume that they prefer the short strike expire worthless over their long. So if you're ever finding that there's a conflicting sort of message between the two, I would typically assume that they prefer this to expire worthless more than they would prefer this to go in the money, just most of the time. And that's just because dealers, as I explained earlier, are selling primarily both by choice and by force. So that tends to be what they focus on. The stuff they buy tends to be a means of balancing the stuff they had to sell. Now, when this is distinctly different is if you look up here at our average gamma premium, you can see on the long side, it's pretty significantly higher than on the short side. A little, almost double, basically, the actual gamma premium average. So what that means to me is that calls, or, well, not calls, but in this case, probably calls, basically long gamma is stronger in terms of which contract is getting the most focus at this moment. And on the short side, that is way more amplified, as you can see here. So in this particular moment, long gamma is dominant. I would assume if we were to go look at the beta gamma ratio, it would suggest the same. And that tells us that we should probably focus on this contract this time. So yeah, they would like this to expire worthless, but it might just be a means of covering and balancing for their much more leveraged, much more exposed long 4400 call. And that's where game really boils down to interpretation. Without having the full order book, it's harder to see, the other layers of dealer behavior that can add nuance to this, but it's still very useful because these are usually the most dynamic, the most short term, and the most subject to intraday change. So the game contracts are chosen because they're the best ones if you were to choose a few to focus on. And that kind of makes it helpful to get your feet wet. If you're somebody who's not familiar with my work, you can kind of get used to seeing what contracts dealers are trading and then using that to help you determine what movement is going to happen as a result. So, to kind of walk through every individual field of game and give you an idea of what it's here for and what it does, we'll just start at the very top. You see I have this labeled as game. So these are your scores for both the long and short side. These two are added together to deliver our final X out of 200 print, and that can be positive or negative based on whether long or short gamma is dominant for that particular day in that particular field. Now, reminder, everything on this side is everything besides a 0 day. This data is from Friday. Everything on this side were contracts that expired on Friday. Now, it just so happens that at this particular point in time, the dates were the same for both the long and the short on this side, but that is not always the case because this is every date up to 730 days that is not today on this side here. We have the long and short for both that are added together to deliver our print. Then under that, we have basically my standardized sum of gamma for the entire set. Just for reference, how strong is gamma in general? This will kind of give you some insight into that. You can see on the 0 day side, we have significantly more of that, and it's going to be fairly common that that's the case. As I said, the accelerative quality of gamma makes it more prominent in shorter expirations. So, today, tomorrow, this week, these are going to have more gamma than something that's, a couple months out or a year from now. So below that, I have basically a gamma to USD conversion to give you an approximation of how much money is parked in gamma alone at that given point. And a lot of people were aware that on Friday there was a ton of option liquidity, a ton of open interest, lots and lots of things were expiring yesterday, and that's reflected for sure on the 0 day side. You can see the massive numbers here compared to the non-0 day side. And I would presume that some of this money, having exited, will be on this side come Monday, moved to different dates and different strategies and so forth. Below that, we already touched on this a little bit. You have the average gamma premium. This basically takes every single contract that met my minimum criteria and tells you the average premium for contracts that have any gamma at all, adjusted for the amount of gamma that they have. And so this kind of helps you decide whether the long or short contract is what you're going to focus on. Like I said, if they're close or neck and neck, I generally think that the short is going to be prioritized because, again, this is dealer behavior. But it still helps to look at this field. Below that, you have the amount of standard deviation in the premium across the entire set. Everything that has any amount of gamma whatsoever that made my scan, whatever the deviation is of the price, that's what you get here. I couldn't exactly tell you how to use that. That's one of those things that's included so that you can kind of study it. It just gives you a little more information, as well as the pins down here. The gamma pins are derived from the contracts. The scored pins are standardized against the set, much like my other stuff. And the average pins are exactly what it sounds like, an average of the two. This just helps you get an idea of where the gamma might be targeting. And in addition to that, you have the gamma target itself from the sentence down here. So you get past the score, like I said, X out of 200. It could be negative or positive. When you have a high positive score, that implies a continuation of our current momentum. Now, this is where it gets really subjective for the viewer. I try my best to have the sentence formulate the current momentum as it can understand it, but it is a formula after all, and something like momentum is a little bit, as I said, subjective. So you kind of have to look at the market yourself and say, okay, which way were we going the strongest when this long gamma piled on? Now, I try my best, like I said, within the sentence to do that for you, but it's always helpful to also just keep an eye on it yourself and make sure that the momentum statement is correct, particularly at the beginning of the day before we've really chosen a direction. That can be pretty important. But like I said, high positive suggests a continuation of the current momentum. Again, subjective, whatever that means to you. Very low negative means a reversal of the current momentum. Once again, that is subjective, whatever it means to you. And then somewhere close to zero generally means that we kind of just chug along, stay flat, maybe grind up, maybe grind down. It's kind of a low gamma environment where you're not going to see very big moves at all. So with all that in mind, we combine our knowledge of what the contracts are suggesting with how strong the momentum is for that day and the direction the momentum is implying. With these three factors together, we can get a good idea intraday of which direction the market is going to go and when that momentum is going to slow or speed. With that, I'm going to open to questions if anyone has any. But I will tell you a little bit about the relationship between gamma and Vanna. It is vitally important. It is not at this time included with any of my free indicators, but the Vanna-gamma ratio, you might have heard of it before. I know that Spot Gamma has talked about it as well as Squeeze Metrics. Essentially, the Vanna-gamma ratio is exactly what it sounds like. It is the ratio of Vanna to gamma within a set of options. In my case, it is scaled against the set just like everything else. But when Vanna is dominant, it is known to invert the gamma directional stance. So when you see that game is really high, let's say 100 out of 200, and it is pointing up, but Vanna is dominant, that means we're going to have a strong move down instead. And like I said, that's something to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that game doesn't work and gamma isn't useful, but Vanna has a high potential to invert it. I would say if you are not a gold subscriber and you have no way to access my Vanna gamma ratio, a good kind of stand-in would be to keep an eye on VVIX, VVIX. When that gets, above 118, 120, it starts to get into tricky territory where you might think gamma is being inverted. So that's a way that you can kind of keep an eye on that for yourself. Or you can subscribe to Gold and get the Vanna gamma ratio from me in the isotopic order book. So other than Vanna, gamma tends to be the top dog. Most of the time, gamma is driving market action. That's why, in my opinion, G.A.M.E is the most useful indicator I have, even though it is also the free one. Now, again, the other occasions and the nuance that adds on top of that can often change and sway the market in other ways. But on your average run-of-the-mill day, gamma is going to be just running the show. Wherever the gamma says we'll go, that's where we're going to go, and that's when G.A.M.E is most useful. One of the ways that I've used G.A.M.E to trade is to just explicitly copy the dealer trade. So if they're doing a short vertical like you see here, I might just sell exactly that. I mean, through virtue of doing a short vertical, you can copy their behavior exactly. You have the lateral in your long call to cover the short call that you sold. So, this is a great way to just copy their behavior, scrape a couple extra bucks over a couple days. If you're not sure what to do, if you think the market's sketchy, sometimes it's better to sell what the dealers are selling versus try to come up with some sort of way to reinvent the wheel, as it were. So that's just one way that I like to use G.A.M.E to trade. And it just so happens the isotopic order book, it has a we buy field, and a lot of the strikes in that field are derived from the G.A.M.E strikes. So, very useful stuff in determining where you're going to buy your strikes, particularly if you already have an idea what directional stance you'd like to have. Even if you're going to buy puts, for example, you might take a look at this and decide that we're going to end the day below 43.95, and let's say we're at 4,400 at that moment. You could buy puts and oppose the dealer behavior with a long purchase. Okay, so I'm getting a question about including key gamma levels, basically in terms of importance, it looks like, or basically closeness to the current price. It's kind of unclear, but second and first tier support and resistance, and then perhaps a third. That's something that I could perhaps make happen. I will get back to you on that. I think that if I was going to do something like that, it might be part of my new time series charts that I'm making, where they would be visualized on an actual chart of S&P 500 or something. So we'll we'll keep an eye on that, and if that doesn't come to fruition, then I'll do it more like you said, just labeling them appropriately within game. I think that could be useful. It doesn't particularly give anything away, but it gives more nuance to the pins themselves. So that's a great suggestion. Okay, I see one question. I may have missed it, but I'd be interested in how you've been using this in conjunction with Nope. I would say I have personally not done that, but I use it in conjunction with something I made for myself and my gold members that is functionally similar. It's a net put delta that is scaled out of 200 to fit and kind of go along with my standardized set of data. But I have every reason to believe that it would be a great supplemental tool to use with Nope to help you determine trend versus non-trend days in the context of using Nope the way that I understand people use it. Well, with that, I think I've answered all the questions that we have for this seminar. Thank you so much for showing up. Like I said, the support of my members means the world to me. Getting a chance to actually talk about this stuff now that I'm getting a break from development, it's really been refreshing. I think you'll get more information as I get a little more revved up in my own mind. I haven't been watching the market quite as much or watching my indicators because I've been focused on bugs and fixes and optimizations. So again, thank you so much for your support. Definitely stay tuned, and there will be more of this to come.